Welcome back to another session on energy step code implementation. My name is Andy Christie. I did a presentation yesterday that was more Kimberley specific, just how a small community like Kimberley implemented step code. I've got some other panelists joining me today from some larger centers. Christy Merle from the City of New Westminster. He's implemented step code since
about a year ago.
About a year ago. So you can hear about his trials and tribulations. And also Tim Rice, who's been on the step code kind of steering committee council, if you want to call it that, and he's been doing it in North Vancouver for 2 years as well. So you guys can hear about them. And I'll go through a general presentation as well, just to bring you back up to code. I'm sure everyone knows about step code by now. If you don't, though, there's a quick recap in this presentation as well that I'll skim through. Then we'll get into some kind of examples, roles and responsibilities in larger centers. And I guess we'll take it from there. Let's go. I'll go back a slide because I didn't know who was joining me on the panel. So basically, this is going to be the agenda for today. We're going to have just a recap quickly of step code again. I've updated some of the slides with some of the implementation dates from the province now, so you guys can see actually the timeline that's going to be official in the code. We'll go through the design, permit, construction process. You guys seen that flow chart, I think, in some other presentations about some changes to the process. I've got some questions to these two panelists as well, just about how they've been facilitating and implementing in their communities. And then second half will be roles and responsibilities, changes to your role as a building official, your department's roles, changes by implementing step code. And then we'll also have some discussion on what worked and what didn't. I think everyone's been figuring out how to make it work in their own community. Specifically, like say, these aren't hard, fast rules that you guys need to follow, but they're more suggestions and kind of how we've made things work or not work. So basically, you can learn from the guinea pigs here of what not to do. So basically, we're going to be talking about changes to Part 3 and Part 9 construction in the energy kind of design of the buildings, and sort of the inspection process by involving an energy advisor in the process. Yeah, more or less, that's what we're going to talk about today. And if you all haven't implemented energy step code and you have a larger department, you want to maybe figure out who's the best in the department to kind of steer that on, because it can get quite detail-oriented. By contacting an energy advisor, it's time-consuming. So it's not something you can easily, as I found out, because I'm the only one in my department, dedicating the amount of time that I need to the energy advisor sort of side of things and keeping this program running, it eats up a lot of time from your other duties. So yeah, I think we'll just keep moving along. So I've already shown you this slide. You guys have seen this climate map of BC showing all the zones. They have moved around a little bit there. You can see the 100 Mile got its own little microcosm. They're really cold there. That's where everything sinks, I guess. And also with the new Teddy changes that are coming out in December, it's actually even gone a little more tailored to each community within that zone, because you can see that it's about 1,000 heating degree days there, each one of those bars. But within that 1,000 heating degree days, that's a pretty big parameter to be kind of pinpointing your community. So now they've actually, in the code, they've gone down to a micro sort of pinpoint for your community just to get it a little bit more accurate. That's the problem we were finding in Kimberley, is that we were on the outside of one of these kind of 1,000 heating degree bars. And the communities that were at the lower end, the warmer communities, they kind of benefited and we were penalized. So the province kind of stepped up and sort of corrected that little problem. It's really helped my builders. You guys have all seen, obviously this is the typical step code compliance pathway in the code for a Part 9 building, with the sort of end date of 2032 to here, sorry, to have it net zero ready in the BC building code. And Part 3 right next to it is coming up here. They only have 4 steps, 3 lower steps and 1 upper step, as opposed to they differentiate in Part 9 to 2 upper steps. And they've also added some other occupancy classifications coming in December 12th changes that you saw, some care occupancy and some assembly type occupancies like schools, colleges, things like that will now be part of the step code, whereas before it was just only residential and office and retail as of now. Yeah. And here's one of the new slides. This is the implementation dates in the actual BC building code. So everyone in this room, no matter what, if you choose to be an early implementer, by 2022, next code cycle, you'll all be a step code kind of facilitator, implementer. Not by choice, but yeah. And starting at step 3 for part 9 buildings and step 2 for part 3 buildings, sorry, is an ambitious first step. You can imagine running up a set of stairs, taking only every third stair. Yeah, it's a big, at least for me, to get to where we are now. I'm just implementing step 3 next year, and I've been doing this since 2014. That's how long it's taken my builders that don't have a lot of access to the education, and I only have one energy advisor, so there's a lack of capacity. So I think this will be a really large step. And then you can see we're progressing into 2027 to minimum step 4 in the BC code and step 3 for part 3 buildings. And you can see the incremental 20%, 40%, up to 80% there in 2032, which all construction would be 80% better than we are currently in the BC building code. Climate zone 4 is still, this metric is still on this slide. I didn't get a chance to change them all. But this is just basically what you see in the code now. It is a little bit different. This is an older one that doesn't have the heating degree days sort of breakdown. That's the last change in the code. I believe it was last year. They broke it down into heating degree days instead of climate zone 4. All the charts are based on your heating degree days. But still the metrics here for air tightness and your MUI and TEDI, everyone knows what those stand for by now. If you don't, thermal energy design intensity, the TEDI would be basically your envelope and how your envelope design reflects energy efficiency. And those numbers are just how much heating load you take to keep that building warm. Versus the MUI, the mechanical energy use intensity, would be how your mechanical system augments or helps out your envelope to keep the efficiency of the building at that heating level that you have desired temperature. It does take out anything that's like a base load, which is like electrical loads, your appliance loads, the homeowners living in there, their kind of needs of liking the house really hot or cool. It kind of removes all that out of the equation and just gives you a baseline of what the reference house actually, so in the building code you'd have a reference house. If you built any house in BC to code, your energy advisor comes up with a reference number for that house. And there's no typical, it's not like two-story house, this house. Every design is their own sort of reference point. So you can't really compare one house that's next to another house. They're not even designed the same, and they will have a totally different reference number. And then when the energy advisor would pick a target number that you want to reach, say step 2, you'd have the modeled house that you would show that, or the actual house, compared to the reference house. And that's the numbers that you get there, the percent, 10% better than the reference house, 20% better than the reference house, or 40% better than the reference house. And then step 5, actually, it has a whole different set of metrics that basically align with passive house metrics, if you guys are familiar with that. So they have their own sort of air tightness qualifications. And generally, it's about 80% better than a code-built house. So that's sort of the breakdown of those. I've added some of the changes there. They're changing this all December 12th again. So like this, like I said, the targeted TEDI that they've created now, there's a change has come out from the step code page. There's one for part 3 buildings. These are all the revision papers that have the new charts, models. I think the maps have stayed the same, but these take effect December 12th. If you have questions later. And the pads in front of you, they could be a tool if you have certain targeted questions for either of us on the panel that you guys want to have specifically answered and we don't get a time. Definitely use the pad in front of you, write them down, and we'll definitely direct you to the right people to get you an answer. So this is some of the step code targets for a part 9 building. Just like that last graph we showed there. Climate zone versus heating degree days, which I said was one of the changes last year. And then the one coming in December of this year would be a variable TEDI. So it's going to be more of a moving target. The TEDI would change for where you are actually within your heating degree climate zone. So it's not necessarily that 1,000 heating degree day zone that you're in currently. you don't have one target for that 1,000 heating degree days anymore. It's actually quite variable, pinpointing your exact heating degree days. And then also the climate zone, or sorry, the climate cities in HOT 2000 is very, very general. So for one area, I have to use a city that's quite far away, and the heating degrees don't match very close at all. So now Kimberley's allowed to use, instead of the closest city like Cranbrook, I can use Smithers, BC as my climate model, because it's better match for my heating degree days. So you guys can choose one that's closer to you in heating degree days, not necessarily geographically close, because Cranbrook's actually almost 2,000 meters lower than Kimberley, gets very little snow, and it's a dry climate. So the temperature is very different. Heating needs in Cranbrook versus Kimberley are very different. So they've allowed us to do that change as well. And this is the MUI targets I was talking about. So it's actually based now, instead of just a general mechanical use for each house, they broke it down last year into the square footage floor area of each house. And then they further broke that down if you're using mechanical cooling or not. So there's 2 charts for a house with air conditioning and a house without. And then you can actually pinpoint now a little closer down to the rough approximation of your floor area of that particular house. So again, it's trying to be a little more accurate and not generalize these targets. Just because you penalize people that are further away from the exact generalization they have listed, and they wanted to make sure each house was fairly modeled, so you don't penalize one builder and one builder benefits from being on one side of the number. Is kind of how they have showed it now. So the province has actually been learning, as well as us as panelists, been learning from implementation. So we've actually been in close contact with the province in helping them change the stuff in the code for you guys. Hopefully by the time they get to 2022 that it's they figure all this science out, so it's a little easier for you guys to implement. Part 3 is a little bit different. Like I say, it only currently is the 2 occupancies, the group C occupancy and D and E that are allowed to use step code. Otherwise, they've got to use the National Energy Code for all the other Part 3 occupancies, if you have it mandated in your bylaw to do that, because step code doesn't cover a lot of the occupancies. And the targets there are really generalized for the Part 3 buildings in residential, as opposed to they've made the micro targets for Part 9 residential. And you can see at the bottom there, I've added hotels and motels is a new change they put in there. They pulled it out of Group C to be specifically just hotels and motels, and now there's hotels and motels and other Group C, and then there's other Part D and E. And the climate zones, I believe they are correcting, they're going to make some more micro targets for Part 3 buildings coming out, which is the smaller change in their Building Code Revision 2. There's a Part 3 change and a Part 9 change. And this is, I grabbed this is out of Part 10 of the BCBC. Basically, you have to conform to Part 8 of the any CV. But yeah, you can see that now they've pulled out hotels and motels that have quite a bit different targets than, say, a residential condo type building, Part 3 building, apartment building. I think they're allowed to have a bit more heating loads in hotels and motels because people like their comfort when they go to a motel and hotel. They're not necessarily energy conscious in a hotel and motel because that's why they're there, to get away from their house. Probably they're hating step code at their house and they went to a hotel and motel or something like that. Yeah, I thought there was a question in here, but so we'll go right on to the design permit build of Part 9, and it's in 936.6 as opposed to 936.5 is the performance path of the BC Building Code, and the step code actually has its own section 936.6, which is quite a bit different than 936.5 when you're energy modeling. My energy advisor often would click each tab to show how the house performs in either side of the code. He tends to like the step code better than the 936.5 modeling, which is more EnerGuide based. He thinks the step code is a little bit more fair with the moving teddy and targets and all that. The EnerGuide one is a little more broad and how you have to pigeonhole your house into a broad target. What may be different in your design is, I see this all the time, a set of plans will come in and then it'll go to the energy advisor and the house design they get back looks nothing like the house that was originally applied for. And that's just for the minimum step 2. Sometimes I have a lot of builders out of province building that aren't familiar with any energy requirements in their province, really, and so they come to BC and they're surprised. But when a lot of the energy advisor is really easy to work with, they've got 600 different parameters in HOT 2000 that they can choose and move around for the builder. And so that they pick sometimes, the most cost effective for that builder, which is a lot of times under slab insulation. They have to up that, or their foundation design. Mechanical energy systems, there's only so many efficient HRVs out there before the cost gets too prohibitive to buy an HRV system that's going to be tens of thousands of dollars. Most of the Part 9 ones are around 55% efficient for HRVs, and that's sort of where everyone sort of picks and chooses from. There's not a lot of room for error there to change your mechanical system unless you want to spend a ton of money. So most of the times they work on the TEDI, which is your envelope design, which is a little bit cheaper. Insulation tends to be a little bit cheaper, easier to fix, moving a few windows around, increasing the insulation in your attic. Those tend to be the cheap fixes for a lot of them. You're probably going to see some passive heating strategies on the south side of buildings to let sunlight in, so different glazing types. I see quite a bit of those. Cooling strategies, you're going to see everything from air conditioning to heat pumps, a lot of different mechanical systems. Again, like larger overhangs for cooling, like passive cooling, things like that. Roof design slopes, types of insulation, you're going to see tons of those. Air barrier strategy, I've seen a real shift from the air barrier being a 6 mil poly on the inside of the wall to the air barrier going to the outside of the wall, and the removal of the 6 mil poly as a vapor barrier. So not having 2 air barriers in the design would seem to be a real problem. Once you get to higher levels and the pressure of the building gets higher, all those little pinhole leaks for wires on the poly, they actually think of like a pressurized balloon in the home if you have a skin on the outside and a skin on the inside. Every little hole is sort of exponentially, the air loss is increased the higher you get in efficiency in a home. So once you get below 1 air change, you have a really airtight home. And you make a hole in the 6 mil poly, it's detrimental, and that air will rush in there with the moisture and heat loss. And if you're using bad insulation, it's a really nasty assembly that you can have a lot of moisture build up in there. We have a temperature gradient of plus 40 in the summer to, we can get down as cold as minus 40 in the winter. So the air pressure in the home, the differential outside versus inside, people like to be 20 degrees-ish. And on a day, if it's minus 37 outside, that's a huge differential in that little wall. And if you're relying on 2x6 with poly and an air barrier, and that's all you have for your thermal resistance, the pressure in that wall builds up and the moisture just rushes in. And you can actually see it in rentals. I've seen where people have rented newer homes. And yeah, you can see the moisture loss at the rim joist, for instance, if it's poorly sealed and things like that. Poly has its limitations, is what I found, the higher level you go. So we also do mid-construction testing of the home just to make sure homeowners are, I really hammer that home so the homeowner is prepared for the final test and they have a chance to fix the envelope, which a lot of the builders really, really like. They get to see kind of where they can improve, how they build, and they can learn why their place is leaking and where it's leaking, the common mistakes that they'll miss, things like the drywaller coming in with the zip saw after they're done their poly and he tears it all apart. Or the subcontractors come in and poke all sorts of holes for ducting, piping, exhaust vents, and they don't get sealed back up. And then all of a sudden the drywaller's on there and no one's forgot to, to remember to seal those penetration points. So they quite like that before, the drywall goes on. They get a test of the home. They see where they're at. Hey, we're doing pretty good. And it always seems to improve by the time we get to final. I haven't had any house go from mid and got worse at the final. There was one actually, and they had a chance to fix it because it was the subcontractor. All they went down was can of spray foam, and instantly it was fixed. You're going to see a lot of alternate material suggestions. I'm seeing materials from all over the globe now. Those don't come with a CSA stamp or a CCMC number. So alternative solutions is, I had to develop that kind of with my program hand in hand because, like I said, the other day I had a rigid foam under strip footing request for energy loss on the interior strip footings. I'd never seen this structural foam product, so I had an engineer sign it off that, yeah, it met the KPA design for bearing on the strip footing, and they could put this foam underneath the footing, so the footing wasn't actually in contact with soil, which prescriptively, you all know, the code says it has to be. So a lot of times your prescriptive code rules are not going to fit with what they're trying to do in their home. Like the higher levels you go, for sure. Passive House has a lot of rules that don't fit any BC building code. They obviously think Passive House supersedes the code in a lot of cases. There's argument there to show that it might not. So you're going to definitely, for architects, engineers, CCMC evaluations, if you can find them, a lot of these products are currently being tested, so you're using products that are been tested in Europe for 10 years, but not tested in Canada. Even windows I've had that don't have, you know, CSA approval on them necessarily, or NAFs, which again be tricky, but when they're tested in the ANSI labs in Europe, they prove that they meet all the parameters of NAFs. So again, you have to have someone sign off on that. Mechanical systems, I've seen every type of mechanical system, heat pumps, you know, typical furnace running 24 hours a day, which seems very inefficient. So a lot of the modular companies seem to want to go to the lower end of the MUI and put in like more simplified mechanical systems versus the higher end of the home. You're going to obviously see more improved mechanical systems. And you're still looking at a lot of those. I've caught a lot of prescriptive faults by installers. They use the wrong type of duct or wrong size of duct. So there's those codes in 936 about flexible versus rigid duct. I've caught a few of those before the drywall goes on that you used the wrong type of duct here. So it actually kills the efficiency of the mechanical system, and then they weren't going to meet their step 2 target. And that would have been covered. And how do you repair all the duct that's behind the drywall? Pretty costly fix to repair that to get back to their minimum step level. Cooling systems, I see everything from heat pumps again, air conditioners that you normally would see running on duct. A lot of extended eaves now, which with that limiting distance calculation at the side yard can play havoc with ventilation of the roof. So then a lot of times when they extend their eave, they're going to a hot roof to get away from that ventilation, but to gain the passive cooling of these extended eaves. So again, the design might not see when you look at it generally, but I've seen a lot of houses change their design to meet the targets, especially when a lot of builders now are targeting their minimum at step 4. They want to be known as a step 4 builder. So their designs look drastically different than they did, say, 5 years ago. Yeah, we'll move on here. I didn't talk about this. Alternate building methods, building techniques, materials, foundation design, orientation of a house. I've got a few houses now that are orientated exactly to the south-facing sun on their lot, and all the other houses on the street are orientated to the street. So some of these houses now that they want to achieve higher targets are sort of sticking out in the communities. They don't typically like face the road with their garage. They're actually trying to orientate to the sun because there's a benefit of solar heat gain. So they kind of stick out in the neighborhood a little bit now, and you get a lot of calls like, oh, why are they allowed to do this? Don't they have to face the street? A lot of the developments that didn't have restricted covenants on facing the street have now put it in there. So again, it might kill a bit of the design. Reviews by me are performed at the permit stage. I review the plans that come in, obviously, for building code, and then I request before I issue a permit that I have an energy advisor review the drawings. A lot of times I wait for that to issue the permit. It might meet prescriptive code when I do my check, and then the report will come in and, oh, we've got a problem. They've got to change the design. So then, unfortunately, a lot of that times you're having to recheck the plans after the energy advisors redesigned the home. You got to recheck it for code because windows will move, eaves will extend is the big one sometimes, and you'll be like, oh, well, that doesn't meet, 9, 10, 15 or 14 there for eave ventilation. How are we going to make this work? So then again, there's another change because code has now impacted step code design. And then I do a mid-construction. I just request a mid-construction test come in. It usually comes in. It's just a simplified form that shows air tightness in a quantitative measure that, yes, they're meeting the minimum target that's required in the bylaw, or they're not, and then they have a chance to fix that. Usually I've had 100% that meet the target. And then at the end, I get a final report, an as-built report. I quantitatively put that into a spreadsheet that tracks basically how we're doing in Kimberley, and I get an average of, right now, almost every year it's been an average of step 3. So that's our logical conclusion was to make it minimum step 3 next year because we haven't had a lot of houses come in under this. When they changed the metrics last year, though, we had a real problem that all our graphs shifted. Each house shifted down a step. And this is when we got hold of Zach and said, we're still building the same way. I think it's something you guys did. And so now they've done that corrective measure, and in December we ran it under the new metrics and our graph shifted everything back. So now we're back on target, so I don't have to repeal the bylaw, which is really great because I didn't want to. If you haven't witnessed air tightness testing or blower door testing, I highly recommend you do it at a zone meeting or on a house project that you have happening. You might have some volunteer homeowners doing it in your zone already or in your area. I recommend you do it. I had brought everyone from the zone meeting in there, and seeing was totally believing. Everyone that went from Stepcoda's witch doctory and hocus pocus actually saw air moving in the house and could see it quantitatively. There was a lot of buy-in. I think in our zone now, almost all the small communities have now implemented it, or they are consulting with the province. The documentation, like I say, alternative solutions for the new materials that usually I like listed, like what type of air barrier you're going to use, where's the air barrier going to be. So my drawings are a little more detailed. The designers have all picked up the ball and run with it. They seem to quite like it. They like doing those little detail cross-section drawings, which I didn't think they would like it, but they love it, actually detailing that for the builder. And then the builder gets a chance to see how the assembly works or not, and you can actually recommend things like, okay, you have a 6 mil poly shown here, and you're going to use an exterior air barrier. You could actually pull one of these out because there's complications. If anyone takes Hamid's course tomorrow, he's got a really good course there on outsolation, where I think the code really needs to go. As far as what I'm seeing in my area, the air barriers move to the outside, and now slowly the majority of insulation is moving entirely outside the frame. So that's for you inspecting. You come in, and at insulation stage, you kind of feel like a fifth wheel there, walking around. You don't see poly or insulation in the wall cavity, and you're like, what is my role now? Well, your role is to make sure that air tightness test is done before the drywall. And you still have to worry about penetrations on the outside of the wall. So how they seal their windows in there, the outdoor plugs have to be sort of changed on how they're designed. They're bagged now, as opposed to the ones on the inside were bagged. But there's a lot less inspecting to do in, say, a ceiling when they go to an outside insulated roof. All those penetration holes that cause the air leakage in the assembly are kind of removed instantly. So it acts as its own system. I could probably have one of these gentlemen here talk about who reviews what in their departments, because mine is pretty much me, and there's not much else than I do. I review everything. These guys might have a differing approach of how they do it in their municipalities. Yeah, Tim or Christy wants to speak to that. I can get some water. Just push the bottle. Grab the mic over here.
You guys hear me on this one? No. I'm not just standing over there.
Okay.
I want it to be like, Sheryl Crow or Jan Arden singing to you guys. Can you guys hear me now? Perfect. Excuse me. Hi. Tim Rice, City of North Vancouver, not too far from here. We are the best part of the North Shore. That's why we got rid of the other groups. Not as beautiful as Kimberley, not as self-sustaining with their own electrical utility as New West, but nonetheless, we do our best. Because you've all had breakfast and it's a little bit, start directly into this, we're going to do some exercises with some hands being raised. So who here would identify themselves as being from a smaller sort of rural community? Interesting, right on. And medium-sized? I would consider ourselves a bit of a medium-sized, love it. A few medium-sized there. And larger communities, thinking sort of Lower Mainland, couple there. So I'm liking what I see, a good mix from across the board. Also interesting to see the amount of smaller communities here. I like to connect with Andy because we live in the same province, but we are truly involved in completely different careers. Andy is everything except for the dog catcher, as I understand it. Business licensing, civil checks, plan checks, issuing, permits, inspections, enforcement, everything. There's all under one hat. I've got a huge team that I constantly grow and try and keep from being poached by other municipalities to support. So it's a totally different world. So would love to hear your questions coming from all of your different backgrounds and also what you're feeling in your own world. This is meant to be as interactive as possible. City of North Vancouver, a little bit of background. We started this journey in 2011. before the step code was a twinkle in the BSSB's eye. We brought in place an energy efficiency local regulation that's since been yanked away by the Building Act that said that we wanted to get to what was EnerGuide 80 at the time, which is about a step 2 home in the early metrics. And we brought that in as a density bonusing, and we took money for it. And we said, you're going to build to that step 2 or that EnerGuide 80, or we're going to keep your money. We kept the money off of 2 buildings in 6 years. And even then, they, instead of hitting EnerGuide 80, it was 78, 79. And those builders never did that again. So when the step code came in 2017, we just went from EnerGuide 80, step 2, done. Energy advisor, energy advisor. Making sure we get a HOT 2000 report with the application, making sure we get a HOT 2000 report with the application. 1 metric, 4. It was awful. I don't know why they did this with the step code. They said Part 9 residential, 5 steps. Part 3 residential, 4 steps. Part 3 commercial, 3 steps. I love the BSSB, but come on. Trying to explain that to the public or council, that was, the staircase doesn't have the same number of steps. That wasn't fair. So the implementation side and explanations were a little bit challenging. We're still working through that. I want to talk about that a little bit later on. But in focusing on what we see on the screen here, our process before the step code is actually very similar to what we're still doing this day. If anything, we're actually able to download a little bit more. We are seeing in terms of application, we do not allow, unlike Andy, I love that you let them come in before having a CEA involved. We're not going to do the work twice. We should be the last check. We monitor. We observe the application coming in. We check a certain number of things that are important to our community and to our council, and we issue that permit. We're not guaranteeing compliance with the code. None of us can do that. But we're a monitoring agency to ensure that we want this type of construction in our community. And so we do a high-level check. At that application stage, the HOT 2000 report must be submitted. The CEA must submit the house performance reports at the time of application. If that's not there, you do not pass go. You do not collect a building permit number. You are out the door. And we found that works really well to force the design team to engage with a CEA early on and to bring that energy advisor's value a little bit earlier in the process. And from that respect, when we go on to the who reviews what, we really want the energy advisor to be reviewing the compliance with the energy step code. We have a structural engineer signing off on structural elements of a complex building. We have building envelope. We have life safety, fire suppression for the complex buildings. On a single family, why wouldn't we let someone else take care of this for us? They are a nationally regulated agency, and I think they're coming into their own slowly over time. And I'd love to see us be able to benefit from that. I will say, when the step code first came in, a lot of new entrants to the market, wide range of value for money for the developer in terms of the quality of the submissions. And so we did go quite deep. We were able to bring into our permit review process a really deep evaluation of what is that we would calculate in-house, the MEUI, the TEDI, the PTL at the time, which is gone. We would do all of that math to make sure we've got that right. It's been 2 years now. That math is getting tiresome. It's getting boring. We've got better things to spend our time on. We're now transitioning to the state where we want to be able to put that back into the energy advisor. If it's a new energy advisor we've never seen before, maybe we're going to check it a little more deeply, but where we know this energy advisor to be a good member of our design team and work with us, we're looking to lighten our load on that side. We do have a mandatory air tightness test. We call it the PATH program, trying to be like NASA and have all these cool little acronyms. It's the pre-drywall air tightness test for houses. My communications team did not really get excited about that, but are you on the path to energy step code success, right? He gets it. Thanks, buddy. My team thinks I'm ridiculous, but we actually pay for that. Actually, BC Hydro pays for that. There is ways of getting Hydro to give you money to give to your teams to be able to pay for this. So $300, we get that mandatory air tightness test in, and we look for that to be submitted. We don't look at what the value is because really pre-drywall depends on exterior air and vapor barrier, interior air barrier. It could be a wide range. There's really no way to know. Fun back into the history. when I worked for the city of Vancouver, prior to coming to North Vancouver, I brought in a similar program based on the EnerGuide program at the time. This was 2007, and we required the same air tightness test, but prior to construction. I see your hand. Okay. Can I just finish my story? Perfect, thank you. Thank you. I'll come back to you. And I got an air tightness test of a finished house, of a pre-drywall house at 12 air changes per hour. And the energy advisor, look, I did my report, 12 air changes per hour. And I said, oh my goodness, we normally see it half of that. Average was 5 air changes per hour at the time, and we would normally see about 6 prior to drywall going on. What went wrong? He says, well, I did it, but the windows weren't in yet. So lots of learning going on. Sorry, we had a question.
Yeah, just going back to this energy advisor and your program to recognize them. Do you have it in your bylaw that for a council policy that you recognize them as not a certified professional, but as somebody you can rely on?
Do we have it in our bylaw that we recognize them as someone that we can sort of delegate part of the review to? No, we do not. We haven't felt the need to go that route. We do the same route with TECA, the stamps that come on there, with BOABC with their stamped process as well. The building code does designate the registered professional as a bit of a separate entity, but we rely on stamps and third-party verification in a number of different places. Haven't felt the need to go to that length of it. Interesting, though, that if you'd like to. Alternative solutions, the big one we've seen out of this is spray foam. Lots of municipalities grappling this one. Vancouver has now said no spray foam to delete cross ventilation in any case whatsoever. Interesting approach, and watching that grow out. The idea of going to a hot roof and spray foaming the underside of the attic. Then we often find, oh, we can put all of our equipment up there. Oh, we can turn that into a conditioned space, and that brings its own challenges as well. So we're always kind of fighting that battle. And then our strategies for failure to reach targets. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. We used to do, when the STEP code came out, pre-application meetings with every applicant. We've backed away from that now. We do that front counter check to make sure they've got an energy advisor involved. We require the PATH program for that mid-blower door test. And so that we get to the point where at completion we haven't seen issues with being able to complete buildings under the STEP code. I will say we did have that 5-6 year period of grooming our community to be ready for this. So taking our time was useful. But then you did see that slide a little bit earlier that by 2022, this is coming in the code. By 2032, we're basically all building or administering the construction of passive house buildings. This is real, it's now, it's impactful. So as much as I say take your time, I think we have to learn to go from crawling to running pretty quickly. Christy, you want to chat?
Hi, I'm Christy with City of New Westminster. Just to give you some sort of perspective of the STEP code, I was in the construction industry in the 1980s, and that's when they had the R2000 program, and I was part of that with a certain product, and was looking forward to the implementation of the energy code. Well, they sold off BC Gas, and they deregulated it down. All the incentives from BC Hydro went with that for the Electric Plus program, and I was out of a job. So I joined the municipality. So that's kind of like a perspective on the STEP code. The R2000 program is what's transformed itself by going to Europe and becoming the passive house. But here we are. We've got this energy efficient world, and I'm happy about it, and it's a good thing. City of New Westminster, I kind of, like, these guys have all this energy and moving ahead with the STEP code. I was kind of more reserved because I know how much work it'll bring to my staff. But regardless of my silent resistance, in City of New West we sell electricity, and what we have is the energy, there's an energy program that they have there. So what they've been doing for the last few years is having builder breakfast and inviting architects, multifamily builders, local builders especially, and designers, and for the last few years they've introduced them to the STEP code and got them accustomed to it. And our staff would also attend these meetings, and they've got acclimatized to it. I also resisted being put into our bylaw until we got enough staff. Well, it got into our bylaw, I never did get the staff. So like all municipalities, you reprioritize to, what is the priority of the day or the month, whatever, and you get the job done. So, interesting story. I asked my staff, here's the story. I failed you guys. I didn't get you staff. And one person stood up and said, look, this is our job. This is what we do. We implement the billing code. So they all rallied around and support, moving ahead with the step code. We're moving into step 3 in January. And so we just met and decided how we're going to announce to the public through emails, through the internet, through our website, postings up front. So we're moving ahead. All the steps these guys are doing, our staff are implementing, and we're getting better at it as time goes on. And it's just like when rain screen came up. Wow, rain screen. But this is much greater magnitude of building code change than rain screen, but one step at a time, and we're implementing it in New Westminster. Any questions?
Thanks, Christy. That's awesome. It's good to hear from other sides that it's not always a glowing success, because it certainly hasn't been at my end of the things. It's been a number of years. This is part of that flow chart we went to yesterday. I liked the one where they broke it down a little bit easier to see the stages and how they all interacted with each other, rather than just looking at a giant flow chart that you're not going to understand. This is basically a part of it from that older flow chart. You can see at the top currently, anyone who's not implementing energy step coder in there is basically, you design the BCBC and you inspect it, they build it, and you either pass it or fail it. Prescriptive is when you come to things like air tightness, though, and energy modeling and energy requirements. It has always been a little bit more abstract. So, like say, you're prescriptive, you can obviously see the value of an insulation in the wall. You can obviously see that there's an air barrier present, but the effectiveness of these assemblies is kind of what the energy advisor would do, and sort of takes you out of that role of giving it the pass or fail. You rely on someone to test it, right? It's kind of similar when you take your car into the mechanic and they plug the car and they figure out what's wrong to a little bit more detail, rather than you just opening the hood and going, yeah, there's an engine in there and it looks like it's going to work. You can see all the parts in the wall, you just don't know how effectively it was installed and what's going on in the assembly. So the energy advisor actually proves the effectiveness of what they've done, versus the old sentences in 925 were provide an effective seal. Well, everyone in this room has probably got a differing idea of what an effective seal is in their mind and how they inspect it. And every builder has an idea. Some acoustical seal, no, I don't want to use that stuff. I can just staple it on, it's good enough, that's effective. Well, it was, really variable, and now in one house it might be effective. The longevity of it, though, might not be as good as another design. So I think the energy advisor sort of proves that, what they're doing is going to meet a certain target. Kind of takes the onus off the inspector to just kind of count up prescriptively if they've met all the, nuts and bolts in the design. I quite like it. It's, you learn a lot about where things leak, how does certain designs of gang studs or certain penetrations, certain assemblies, not having a raised heel in your design at your attic, like all these ineffective things that you don't think about, because not having enough insulation at the eave, and we get about 4 feet of snow and overnight sometimes, and then we can get a day where it rains the next day and the sun comes out. Ice damming is a reality, roof collapses are a reality, so ventilation and insulation at the eaves is very critical in the climate I'm at on the side of a mountain, where I've had many buildings collapse. People can't get out of their doors in the morning. I get all these kind of phone calls to call the fire department because the snow is, there's no header in a lot of these old houses, and all of a sudden they can't open their door. So you have to kind of like, okay, what do we do? And it's amazing the amount of houses in Kimberley that when they were designed by the miners have no insulation in the walls. And like I say, when it's a minus 37 outside and you have no insulation in your walls and the furnace is running 24/7, yeah, it's pretty hard on your design, especially if you put in a really poor, ineffective vapor barrier. All that vapor that's in the house, it kind of worked well when there was no insulation in the walls because it just bleeds right through the wall and the wall stays bone dry. And these studs are so rock hard, you can't even get a nail in when you're renovating, but everyone's renovating these houses now. And so it's all these builders that are building the new house to energy modeling, a lot of them take these practices back to their renovations now, and it's actually improving the renovation stream. Tim's saying it doesn't happen where he is, but.
No, what I'm saying is it's incredibly dangerous.
Oh, yes.
Where we see it in the lower mainland, the folks that are around here, existing buildings have survived, especially some of our heritage
Yes.
buildings that are primarily loved to keep around. They have survived because we've had that basically a hot air blowing through the wall
Very much.
continuously. And then we see a renovator come in and they throw in a bunch of insulation and do all this wonderful stuff. And within a year and a half, that building's rotted out and it's lost because they didn't recognize the survivability of that older building. Sometimes things have to be energy inefficient because that's the way they work.
Yeah.
And they may have to remain that way.
And that's, like I say, I've taken that all-day course with Hamid, and I recommend if you want to learn some new strategy on building, if that interests you. But yeah, the outsolation part of it is kind of how I look at how biomimicry happens. He takes a whole design of basically how human beings exist. Our HRV systems, our lungs and our mouth and our esophagus is all separate from our envelope. And when we go outside to get cold, we don't put insulation under our skin and inside our bodies. We put it on the outside of our bodies. So it's sort of like, that's how I look at it, how he's designed the home. He actually works for BCIT and he measures these walls, tests these walls with thermal, measuring in the wall, and moisture meters in all these designs he builds. And he's fixing all these problematic new homes and renos in West Vancouver, these multi-million-dollar homes that all of a sudden they have moisture problems that's dripping from their windows or their walls are rotting. He goes in and does the investigation of these, comes up with solutions on how to rectify the problems in all of these roofs. He goes to a outsulated roof that corrected all the moisture problems that was in this multi-million-dollar home. And he's actually designed models for us. We have 30 to 40 now mock models of wall under foundation design and roof designs that are sitting at the College of the Rockies in Cranbrook, that the carpentry program actually can look at all these different wall types, foundation types, and roof types of how to build them. And he's got them all broken down and labeled, and they're on wheels, so they get wheeled around to all the conferences we go to and all the training. It's actually so good to have something hands-on. And we can discuss each wall, like the typical merit of like a 2x6 wall with insulation in it versus an outsulated wall versus another wall. And we took that course and we had to design our own wall type, and then Hamid basically just hammered us on how badly we did. So it was kind of funny, the whole room full of inspectors, playing off each other and basically picked apart our design. So. This is that flow chart that I think was developed, City of Richmond used this and how they implemented step code into their department. Yesterday, I did see that better flow chart there that kind of breaks it down in stages and just shows you like how there's some loop back if there's a failure for retesting and all these things. The no-fail option has come up, I believe, in the City of Vancouver and all these things. I disagreed with that process because I think it kind of takes away the whole purpose of what the step code's trying to achieve and what we're trying to do as officials. And if you'd allow a house to be extremely leaky, like that's just going to be a problem down the road. And if we're just going to whitewash it away with, you can use this no-fail option and just input this number that on paper makes the house meet code, but functionality of the house, if it has 10 air changes of air leakage, you know in 5 years from now, they're going to have moisture in the walls and they're going to have problems. And who are they going to point the finger at? The building official is always the common denominator that gets the blame for those types of things. So I think it's opening up another can of worms, personally, for future problems. The legal and ethics course could probably speak to that, but I think it's going to be another leaky condo problem that we're going to be leaking from the inside this time, with moisture getting into the walls through tightening up the envelope and putting in better windows and doing some air sealing, but you're pressurizing the house greater than it was before. When the leaky condo had, the assemblies we're using, the air barrier types we're using, putting double air barriers in the walls now, which is a standard practice, poly and Tyvek or Typar, those are both air barriers. So doing a dual air barrier, we're creating bigger problems. And if both are leaking, both of them are hitting those materials and running down. So I'm seeing massive rot at sill plates and rim joists in houses that were built 10 years ago before my program that basically relied on the effective seal. It's not effective. These people are pulling these houses now apart, and they're less than 10 years old, brand new homes that are completely rotten at the sill plates and the rim joist because all that moisture is hitting either membrane, can't get out, runs down, hits the wood. Higher than 19%, you get rot. And even in my climate, I have such a low moisture content being in the rain shadow of the Rockies there that, yeah, like by the time Kimberley gets there, it's usually static dry in the summer, and the winter it's the same. We get that dry champagne powder. So it's a very dry climate, but why are these walls rotting? It's not from outside. We don't have rain screening. It's from air leakage getting into the walls. So that's primarily what we're seeing. These are, obviously you've seen these forms. I'm sure if you haven't done step code and gone through these forms, they are a little intimidating at the start because there's a lot of information, a lot of acronyms, a lot of things that you might not know, equipment listed that you're like, what does that mean? Have the energy advisor walk you through it. It's pretty easy to do. There's a few things that I highlight on mine that I know to look for now, the climate zone. The P number is the registration with EnerGuide or NRC Canada, that they can get some other grant money. And then I usually look for on the second page there if they've achieved the target that I'm desiring, which is step 2 right now. And then I input a reference house number versus their modeled number of anticipated energy usage, and I put it in a graph. And then I've been sending those to Zach kind of to show how our house has been doing. We, on average, right now, we're about 46% more efficient than code on every house that is built in Kimberley. And a lot of that is just air tightness. A lot of these designs are still 2x6 walls. A lot of them have 6 mil poly, a lot of them don't. But yeah, there's not a lot has changed. The only variable that's changed is how builders make the house more airtight. And the implementation of an HRV, obviously, in the new construction now. Those two things are the only real drastic changes I've seen. A lot of people are making better windows, I see, is a common one, or more insulation than is required by prescriptive code. Those are the common things I'm seeing to achieve step 2. 10% better is fairly easy.
So
Tim might have a comment?
I do, if that's all right. If I
Yeah.
stand up. Yeah. Time to raise your hands again. How many of you have had step 2 or step code buildings in your community that you've administered? A whole bunch that haven't. How many of you have had Performance Path 936.5 that came out in 2015 in your community? Not necessarily this year, but have done it. I see, okay. And how many of you have done prescriptive? Everyone should raise their hands, man. Come on now. I get it. It's hard work first thing in the morning. So, sorry. The interesting thing here is if, since everyone put up their hand for prescriptive, you are all doing more work than you have to at this point. If you get yourself into step code, you get your community into step code, you get your energy advisors in your community into the step code, you get your council, your whole design team on board with it. Yes, there's work up front. All of that prescriptive work, which is what, 50 pages in the building code, 936.2 to 936.4, the trade-off methods, the parallel path calculations, which of course we're all doing in-house to double check the applications of our designers, because that's how we monitor if that's what you're checking in your community. All of that goes away. Step code was designed from the beginning to be a lighter, more flexible application of energy efficiency to the built environment. 3 things: air tightness, PTL, or not, it's gone now, sorry, showing my age, TEDI, and MEUI, or percent better than. 3 numbers that someone is giving you with an outside authority, and all you have to do is look at those 3 numbers. All of you are doing too much work. There's other things you could be focusing on. I'm sure you'd love to be able to use those oodles of vacation that they try to make it worthwhile to work in a public sector for. So you can make your life so much easier by going down the step code route. If the step code is able to be adopted into your community in an effective manner with support from yourselves, from your ideally your sustainability groups or planning groups if you've got that on board, and then support from the local building groups, CHBA we met from yesterday, or Haven in the Lower Mainland. There's ways of bringing this in that will end up that you will do less work. I can't stress that enough. We put the work that we are doing right now into the hands of others that we can, through the national organizations, trust that they're hopefully doing that work the best they can. Does that make sense?
So what is your staff that's with City on campus? So what does their typical day look like on that apartment at home?
So I have 3 members of my team in the room, so they will tell me if I'm saying this wrong, because they're very vocal people to me. So what is the staff at the City of North Vancouver typical day? So you're talking from a plan check point of view?
Plan check and inspection.
Okay, so I have 2 separate teams. I have a plan checking team that's in-house, and I have an inspection team that go out. We do building, plumbing, and gas, and electrical inspections in the City of North Van. From the plan checking side, that plan checkers from the focus on Part 9 residential, I feel like that might be the best for the group here. They're doing a lot of front counter interactions, making sure that what's coming in is complete. As I said, we've got that Energy Advisor package as part of that submission. We do a front counter check, we gatekeep it. When we get into the actual plan checking stage, we have what we call an in-house submission checklist that we go through, a plan checklist that helps us contain the amount of looking we're doing on an application. We are a monitoring agency. We're not designing or building this. And part of that is the step code compliance. 3 numbers when we have an energy advisor that we're familiar with, making sure that the HOT 2000 report, couple of checks to make sure HOT 2000 assemblies look like they match the drawing assemblies. If that doesn't work, that's a hard stop. But then we're done on the energy side. So we can focus on life safety. We can focus on all of the other things that our plant checkers are saddled with. Stormwater management from our engineering groups, adaptable design guidelines from our planning groups. For the complex buildings, we have a district energy system that we have to connect to, finance, bonds, all this other stuff that you guys do at a plan check stage. There's nothing to do with the building code. That's the elements that comes into my team. On the inspection side, focusing on the energy element, we've cross-trained our building, plumbing and gas, and electrical inspectors to all be kind of looking over each other's shoulders to make sure that we're all catching this best we can. So our electrical inspectors are going out there. When we were back in the performance stage, they'd be talking with the electrical contractor saying, hey, you know, do you know where your air and vapor barrier is? And the electrician goes, I know to hook the white to the white and the black to the black and the green to ground, but I don't know what an air barrier is. And the electrical inspector was talking to the electrician saying, you need to, you're part of this team, let's get you talking to the GC on site, make that happen. Plumbing and gas, same thing. And we heard about the penetrations. Every single penetration will cause either a damage to meeting the air tightness or a massive moisture penetration point in the future. So we've tried to cross-train as much as possible. It's where I don't envy Andy going out in the field where he is the building department. That's a real big challenge where you don't have other folks that are on site able to help out from that side. So if that is you, I'm certainly proud of what you're doing out there. It just changes the tenor of your conversation on site. Any other questions about how we do it on the North Shore? I should add one thing. When we brought in July, December 2017, we brought in the step code. We transitioned off our old EnerGuide 80 system. In July 2018, we went from step 2 to step 3 for large Part 9 houses. One of the exciting things, I see your hand, one of the exciting things we did was District of West Vancouver, District of North Vancouver, City of North Vancouver, we all went the same. July the 1st, step 3 across the board. You saw the previous slide with the step code documentation. We co-branded a set of that documentation for the North Shore. So any builder building anywhere off on any of those 3 municipalities, it's the same paperwork. It's being evaluated ideally the same way. And we've had 0 pushback from industry on that. We've also had 0 applause, which I really thought we should. In fact, that this is one of the first times that municipalities got together and worked on this. I kind of thought they'd at least send a letter to the mayor, but nothing. So I'm still pushing for that. But we simplified the provincial documentation a little bit. The one online, I think it's 3 or 4 pages now. Ours is 2. When we brought it in for 936.5, it was 1. There is some information in the provincial documentation that is not directly pertaining to the administration of the building code. I mention that just so that you're aware. There are numbers on there that you do not need to feel that you have to check or have custody over. And he talks about his review. He checks those certain numbers, puts it into a spreadsheet for his own municipality's verification. But he's not looking at that daunting 4 pages of documentation. A lot of that is to help get back those grants, register for the EnerGuide program if that's what they're a part of, make the energy advisor feel like they're contributing to the process. for us on the North Shore, we skinnied it up and said, we just want to know what's for building code compliance in terms of your extra information for sustainability or planning groups. Let's just park that somewhere else for now. There was a,
So at the City of North Vancouver, do you guys have a policy, like where people come in for houses with revisions, specifically window size changes, whether it be adding windows or making windows significantly larger, that's going to affect the energy report? Do you guys have like a cutoff as to when you ask for a new report, as to when you don't, like if
Right.
from a 3020 to a 3620, that's pretty small.
Right.
But there could be large amount of windows, I don't know, is it like 10% change, 5%
Right.
change, when do you ask for it?
so what I'm hearing is when do we ask for the correlation of the HOT 2000 models to be updated to a revised plan?
Yeah.
Natasha, do you want to answer that? Natasha's my superstar plan checker out there. Why not?
Well, we generally make we ask them to change or give us reports when they change mechanical equipment and things like that, because that would impact the building a lot. In most cases, we do spatials, and so we need to make sure that the spatials meet. And so most cases, they don't really increase the size of the windows by a lot because the spatials didn't meet. So we haven't seen a lot of cases where the rate has increased by a lot to make us ask for a revised project.
So
Yeah.
so where it's going
In the city
down.
of North, we see-
Yeah.
we see a lot of changes.
Yeah.
But we have a lot of other homes, I think you
Yeah.
guys in North Van have more custom, very expensive homes that
Of
don't
course.
change that much.
Only the best.
But because I've seen like whole designs of homes change, adding giant windows where there weren't before,
So-
before there was no step codes, it wasn't really an issue, just update your structural
Yeah.
drawings and you're good.
Yeah.
You're good.
So where I'm hoping the industry goes is prefab or modular construction. I think that's going to be good for our communities and for energy efficiency in the future, provided we catch a few things we were talking about earlier. But what we need to leave behind is revisions entirely. No one likes to have work that we've already completed come back to us, then we have to do again. That's just unfair. We're done with that. Get it out the door. So when we brought in the performance path in 2015, this predates Natasha a little bit, we made it really painful to do revisions. So you're telling us that you've changed your mind. Don't change your mind again, because we're going to slow you down. So we actually put basically the effectiveness of a stop work order on when a revision comes in. Our permit system automatically puts a hold on the parcel. All of the related inspections requests for trade inspections or trade permits, as well as the building permit, go on hold. They cannot book an inspection while the permit's going through a revision cycle. That worked really well to help these guys get tuned up on site. So we're at a point where we see less revisions, or the revisions that we see are so ridiculous, like you're mentioning, that it really does deserve that second look. And where they are significantly changing, we're going to expect that HOT 2000 model to come in and make the applicant wear the cost. I mean, at some point, we issued a building permit. That permit is a contract between the builder and the city, not even us, but the city, to say, we want this to be contributed to our community. You're putting this structure in our community for 30, 40 years, hopefully, if not longer, and we want that to be there. And so we're signing a contract through the building permit that you're going to build that. If you want to change the contract, we should be allowed to look at it, and we're going to take as long as we need and get any information we need to make sure that we want that in our community. And I think that's an authority that we should bring to bear. Frank.
So I'm going to go back for your previous statement. Just kind of curious, you mentioned that Vancouver doesn't allow spray foam in deck roofs.
Yeah.
So, but yet, when Paul came to one of the LTC meetings, he had said that if they have a hot attic, he gets an envelope professional. So wouldn't that basically negate their bullet success,
Yeah, so the way that I understand the Vancouver spray foam situation as it stands right now is they are no longer entertaining isolated alternative solutions to 919.11, which says, unless it can be demonstrated as unnecessary, cross ventilation shall be provided between the underside of the roof sheathing and the insulation. So you get some drying factor in there. Concept there being everything leaks, right? Every roof will leak at some point, so let's get some safety factor in there. Put spray foam on it, you lose that sort of survivability of the structure. You know this very well, Frank. Where they're out is okay, well, go get an envelope consultant. And my understanding was not just for the roof, but you're designing that entire building to Part 5. So you're actually taking a Part 3 type solution of which is Part 5, the envelope separation, and you're bringing that into a Part 9 home. Again, as we said in Vancouver, even more bespoke houses, even more of a lucrative area to construct. So you have that ability to bring another registered professional on board. I know West Vancouver, there's a registered professional for building envelope for every single building. Interesting to hear that we're still seeing problems over there. So there's certain municipalities that have that ability to bring that on. For us, we're still in that point of view of, well, if you can't use, some cases, if you can't use spray foam, is it not going to work anyway? Now you're trying to get that cross ventilation in. Is that still going to cause a bit of a risk to the structure because you're not getting the ventilation at all? So it's a bit of an internal debate we're having right now. You guys, one second. Who talks?
Okay, next question, Christy. Okay. I gotta fly through some slides here. So part 3, a little bit different. This is the sort of the joint guide from APEG and AIBC on whole building energy modeling services. Obviously for them to sign a schedule, which there's 2 categories now for energy modeling on Schedule B. So for architectural, it usually gets signed off and acknowledged that they're following STEP code or National Energy Code 2015. They focus more on insulation and air tightness. Obviously, the mechanical systems are quite different. There's actually another acronym, the TUI. It's the total energy usage intensity as opposed to the TEDI and MUI. There's the other acronym there. And what's different in this acronym is that lighting and appliance loads and the actual use of the power of the building is factored into a Part 3 building versus a Part 9 building. Those are pulled out. Those are considered like nominal loads in a house, and they just pull those out as a factor when they're modeling the home in a Part 9. Also, at the building permit, you're going to see the energy statement on the drawings, or you should. Professional practice guidelines and the schedules. Like I say, the Schedule B has a tick box for BC Energy step code. And I believe that next slide shows it. Yes, you can really not make it out. I did highlight it, just out of the scanner there, but it's the last 2 sections they've added here. It says it's going to be ASHRAE, National Energy Code, or Energy Step Code compliance, and they also do a building envelope testing confirmation as per the section that's pertinent to that. Can't quite read that one. Oh, did I go too fast here? So a whole building air test looks quite a bit different. Like I said, I talked about that. Those are the standards usually that you're going to see there. The TUI, the TEDI, there's overheating, savings over a baseline building. Emphasis is on the thermal comfort and not having an overheating with the mechanical system, which yesterday in one of these rooms it was completely hot in here. You can see, the standards there. Vancouver has actually their own one. BC Hydro has some play in some of the standards there. The ASHRAE 90.1 is one of the newer standards that you can use, as well as a pathway. It always used to say our best engineering practices. Well, that is the ASHRAE guide there for full model monitoring. Looks like the timing, required a building permit. Air tightness testing is required in Part 3 buildings, but there hasn't been really a target for air tightness testing. Like in Part 9 buildings, you saw that 3.5 is kind of sort of basic code, and then it goes down to as close as 1 air change, even less than that. Here, they just want you to do an air tightness test with no real target. So again, that is changing in the new revision though, because there are going to be some targets now for assembly occupancies, primarily schools and colleges, because they end up having a lot of energy loads for those buildings, and they want them to be energy efficient and airtight for moisture and mold buildup. And also, I think it has to play into the carbon monoxide monitoring in schools, because there's been some problems lately. So having a real airtight building, again, would cause the carbon monoxide to build up in percentages. So you can see like the multiple, when they do a air tightness test in a large building, the fan units, it's not just a single door unit anymore. It's sometimes very large units that they got to fit into a bay door or something like that. I haven't witnessed one yet. I have a new big shopping kind of center being built in Kimberley, and I will witness a whole building air tightness test on it, which will be interesting, I can imagine. Like I say, yeah, there is really no targets for air tightness testing. That is changing this December, like I said, for certain occupancies. Good impact. So yeah, like most now that voluntary, you can require tests or not, I think is what the sentence is asking. And then, like I say, the changes coming in the Part 3 revision here, it's going to definitely affect how air tightness and modeling is done for Part 3 buildings. I've got 4 Part 3 buildings right now. Some are under BC Energy Step Code because only certain occupancies are under BC Energy Step Code. Remember I said Part C or D and E. Otherwise, those occupancies, like I have some marijuana manufacturing, large 8,000, 10,000 square foot buildings now, because they've pulled those out of the agricultural land reserve because that's not considered agriculture when you start doing it inside, apparently. So now all these farms to get licensed federally are coming to the cities to get manufacturing permits for indoor growing. Seems kind of odd to me, but that's how they're getting around their federal license. Again, yeah, the Part 3, same kind of graph as what we showed there before. It was designed to NECB or ASHRAE as per the BCBC, and then they built the building. Now, again, yeah, you're going to have an energy model, which there's the same documents you see for pre-construction. They're not necessarily the same content in those forms, but a Part 3 has the actual forms for pre-construction and as-built. There's some air tightness done there as well, but like I say, without a target or needing to meet a target, there's really no fail-safe there or having to fix for air tightness on the envelope. And most of those have an envelope sign-off or like an envelope designer or a specialist there that they're signing. But recently, I've building for Jimmy Pattison, obviously for a new Save-On Foods, their modeler had no idea about Energy Step Code, which I found interesting. Obviously, maybe they've never built one in the Lower Mainland where it's required yet, but they're building quite a few new stores in our area at least, and now they're on board with, we actually learned it together because I hadn't done a Part 3 building yet myself, and yeah, it was definitely a different learning experience than a Part 9 building. This would be for the office and retail, steps 2 to 3. Like I say, there's only a few steps. It does show a fail in here, and you'd have to revise your construction. But like I say, the targets for air tightness testing are pretty loose, so I'm not totally sure on this fail path yet. I will be learning about it. We're just at foundation stage, so yeah. And they're coming into, they want to have an online form in development, so a fillable form, I think, that everyone can be using. That would speed up and simplify submission and review. I think if they can have a sort of a form that they can go in and edit and change, although I'm hearing changes in North Van are not pretty good. And it says similar to the City of North Vancouver form, and that might be a good chance for Tim to speak about that.
Yeah, so let's get into the hand raising again. So how many people in the room have Part 3 buildings that they're administering or that are being under construction? Oh yeah, great. So every single one of you that raised your hands, you're going to keep your hands in the air because you all asked for the verification documentation for ASHRAE or NECB compliance for energy efficiency, right? The forms that are in the back of ASHRAE or you got sign off on all of those documents. You checked the 18 different pages that came in, right? Yeah. No, not so much. Okay. So just like I said, let's get the people doing the work themselves. The change to the letters of assurance that includes step code on architectural, plumbing, electrical, and mechanical letters of assurance. That is the most powerful step code compliance tool that came out of the whole implementation process a few years ago. That put the authority back into the registered professionals in their hand to work on it. What it doesn't do is tell them how to work together. So bit of an issue there. City of North Vancouver, we captured that. I had an interesting exchange where I was accidentally forwarded an email about a new rental tower going up, where the design team was having a fight about the vestibules on the front door. It came from the co-consultant saying we don't need the vestibules for life safety. It's not a smoke control, so we're not part of this. But you might want to be a part of this. and you read down through the chain, it comes right from well, I'll start at the bottom, the architect saying, I really don't like vestibules. Why is there a vestibule in my building? Mechanical saying, oh, well, you know, we don't really need them for mechanical. Electrical saying, well, it might be something to do with energy, which I applaud the electrical because there's nothing to do with them. Architectural saying, well, I don't really know about the energy. Is that a big deal? Mechanical saying, well, do you think the City of North Vancouver will check anyway? Co-consultant saying, maybe City of North Vancouver wants to get this email. So appreciate the co-consultant on that one. The requirement for that vestibule on the front door was for ASHRAE 90.1, 2010 or whatever that building was built under, which meant for Climate Zone 4, Lower Mainland, that vestibule was a required element for the energy efficiency. It slipped through the cracks. I sent out an email back to them saying, do you know which energy compliance pathway you're using? And they had no idea of those registered professionals which pathway they were using. So before we get to step code, there was ASHRAE and NECB. ASHRAE had prescriptive sections and actually mandatory requirements. Thou must do things like the vestibule. Then it had prescriptive. Then if you didn't like to do the prescriptive, it had trade-off. But there was also a simple trade-off and a complex trade-off. And then if you didn't want to do any of that, you could do a model called the energy cost budget. NECB over here had no mandatory elements, but it had prescriptive requirements, and then each one of those prescriptive had trade-offs. If you didn't want to do that, you could do a model, and because it's a national model code, under the national model codes from the NBC and NECB, all the rest of them, you could do an alternative solution to anything that's in the NECB. So you have two, one's a standard, one's a code, and within there was a whole tree of application pathways of how to get to an efficient building. Horribly inefficient way to design it. So what we found was that no one at the design side was talking. And when they did talk, it was way too late. Foundation was poured, the equipment was spec'd, and the energy efficiency literally went out the window. It was not organized. So we brought in documentation. Excuse me. All it does is force the design team to talk to each other by signing a signature on a piece of paper saying, I, as the CRP, have said we're following ASHRAE or NECB, or I added in step code, and then we get documents, or they're called design intent letters, is a fancy word, basically from each designer, each registered professional that says, yes, I hear that CRP wants me to use ASHRAE, and I commit to using ASHRAE. And they talk to each other. That's all we ask. And that is as far as we need to go in terms of compliance verification for the step code and now for the energy efficiency for Part 3 buildings. There's registered professionals that are getting all sorts of accolades and appreciation for designing these wonderful buildings. They can take responsibility for the energy efficiency for Part 3 buildings. Step code compliance, keep it down to those few numbers. And even better in Part 3, since we don't have, or we didn't have, targeted air tightness, they can put whatever number they've modeled that building to, and we don't even have to say, does it meet 1, 2.5, 3 air changes per hour? It's whatever they decide, and it's up to them to demonstrate at the end that they have met that. So trying to back ourselves out of the design process or the administration process as much as possible. Great minds, they've been to school for years and years to work on this stuff. That's the one thing they do. They're not worried about business licensing or worrying about people getting stuck in their houses when it snows. That's insane. I had no idea I also didn't know ice damming was an actual thing. That doesn't happen around here. So I need to come visit. So the one thing that we do get ourselves pulled into is occupancy. Everyone wants that occupancy certificate. Everyone wants to be able to convey, typically on the residential side, there's a whole bunch of lawyers clamoring to be able to register mortgages, and they need that occupancy. Our first step code building is currently 3 stories out of the ground. It's an 8-story wood frame building let's call it a 6-story for the people here. 6-story wood frame building on a concrete podium, and it will be probably our first step code administered building in there. We have started to have conversations about the occupancy process now. They won't be going for occupancy at the very earliest, the end of next year, if not the year after that. We're already starting to think about if they want phased occupancy, how do we do the air tightness testing for that piece? What kind of documentation are we going to be expecting from them? That's more me saying, what kind of documentation can you give me? Because you're the first. Let's figure this out together. So we're having those conversations as early as possible so that we don't come across as a bureaucratic block at the end of the day, when really those, again, letters of assurance, registered professional involvement, that is where the confirmation of compliance comes from and needs to rest at the end of the day. So that's what the documentation at the provincial level is hopefully going to follow the same pathway.
I see that, yeah. Just gonna see if I can get Christy up here. We'll skip those questions because they're not here. You can see that some of the updated roles there we talked about earlier. Some parts are gonna get transferred to other areas that you may not necessarily know about. Definitely the current roles in the responsibility have changed over to some third-party people that not necessarily registered professionals, but a lot of them times it's going to be registered professionals. In a Part 3 building, almost always. Sometimes you can have an energy modeler that's not a registered professional that's working under the guise of the registered professional. The passive house consultants, I guess they're not a registered professional, but they supplement an architect by meeting the passive house standard, which is another arm's reach organization. So you're going to get to see a lot of different pathways and different people. The working with the energy advisor here, definitely these are some of the things you're going to look for on the forms. Like say all those acronyms I talked about there, the TEDI, the TUI, the MUI for part 3. The TUI is part 3. Not necessarily you're going to see that in Part 9. There are some Part 9 buildings that fall between Part 3 just because of if you look in the section there where that outlines compliance, there's some Part 9 buildings that are non-residential occupancies. They might not be the size of a Part 3 building, but because of their occupancy classification and non-residential use, they fall into a Part 3 model. I have some Part 9 sized buildings that get modeled as a Part 3 building. Not the other way. You never see a Part 3 building modeled as a Part 9 building, thankfully. Yeah, so that's for a Part 3 there. You can see the TEDI and the TUDI, those are the two acronyms to know about there. And then air tightness, like say, is going to be added coming in December to a few of the occupancies, but not all of them. So there will be a target for air tightness for a few buildings. Working with air tightness tester, you can see basically they come in and this is what they look like on site. This is a step 5 house that was sorry, it's for the horrible dark photo, but you can see there is actually no poly other than in a few select areas that they had to air seal certain aspects. But the general wall assembly is all outside air barrier. This house achieved a 0.04 air changes without the use of poly. So I think it was pretty eye-opening for a lot of the inspectors that were here that typically prescriptively look at a house. And the energy advisor there has some tools in his toolbox, which is a smoke pencil that they go around and walk around. And when the smoke starts fluttering, when the house is at 50 pascals, because he can ramp this right up because it doesn't rip the poly off the wall. This house is totally pressurized at 50 pascals, and you walk around with a smoke pencil, instantly the smoke would flutter and you know you have an air leak. So the homeowner here in this case was basically following around and patching those holes to improve his air tightness and got it down to the 0.04 in real time. Because we started at 0.07, which is still a really good performing home, but he wanted to get below that threshold for a passive house there, which is 0.06. So 0.6, sorry. And then they worked a little bit harder and they actually got the house to perform to 0.4, which is super airtight. And Norm isn't with us from the City of Westminster, but I can ask Christy, I imagine. We understand that the City of New Westminster is looking to create a new role within the building department to support the implementation and management of the STEP code. Can you please share more about this role and what gaps you're hoping it'll fill and what qualifications you're looking for? Did you fill that role? This was last year's question.
Yeah, that's long gone.
Okay. We'll finish off with a question from Christy.
So like I said, I didn't get any staff. But they're looking to also restructure that to have a climate action group, staff of 3. And one of those staff will also help out the building department with questions to the public. Another role that person will take is to do with the larger development, Part 3, large Part 9, with people taking their applications through the planning division for review. So at that time, they would engage with the developer's architect and also with planning staff, because they're not very knowledgeable on the step code requirements, so that when they reach the point of building permit application, they will be ready to submit the required documents to support that application. That's the update.
So, coming down to it, you almost down to your snack time, right? Because that's important. Yeah. Any random questions or thoughts that you want to put out here? I think it's an opportunity to hear from you guys what you heard, what you like, what you didn't like, what you're nervous about, where you're at in your own journey for your community. Frank.
I'm just curious how much you charge to go around and help all of us do this stuff.
How much we charge. It's sometimes the BOABC comes to us and says, hey, we need a panel put together, and you did it last year, and we do it. So we're kind, right, guys? Yeah, that's about it.
Actually being serious, in reality, those of us that don't have the background and ability to do all this stuff because we are smaller in numbers, we really do need that resource person
Yeah.
to go to and educate us in a simpler manner at first until we get hold of it. I think too much we just basically go blind into it and accept letters that we don't even know if the letters are right or wrong. And it's a disservice to the public. And I just feel there has not been enough training for us as inspectors and plan reviewers. The province is throwing all at us, and it's just like boom. And it gets to a point we start shutting down.
It's almost from a protectionism point of view, eh? Ignorance is bliss, yeah. You saw the slide there that 2022, everyone is step 3 as baseline for the building code. That's impactful. It's coming really close, yeah. And along with that, the Building Act kicking in qualified requirements, so we might be losing some people in the industry or gaining a whole bunch of new people that might be new to the organization. So there's going to be a big change in the next couple of years. I think it's an opportunity for us to talk to our leadership. I know there's a town hall at the end of the day. I'd love to hear that raise as to what training you feel. I think you got a great answer there. Yeah, go ahead.
So I was just saying, Frank, to answer your question, we do the builder breakfast, and just coming out of the last builder breakfast, we know Richmond does builder breakfast, so we're thinking of starting to combine. Langley does a builder breakfast, the township of Langley. I attended, they do a great job. So I'm just thinking out of this, as municipalities talking to each other, maybe they can help each other out. And just out of these builder breakfasts, we have builders that have themselves banded together, a group of them, and hired RDH to work directly with them so they can develop a better product. So we initiated the builder training. They've now taken it over and starting to own it themselves, and what can they do to make a better product, and lead the builders in the area. Because they'll at some point, like next year for us, January, you're going to have to meet step 3. So all the people who've never attended these resources, our builder breakfast, will be, starting to attend these and get up to speed.
And yesterday's session, the start was the creation of this new handbook for building officials about basically the step code and your role as a building official and how to implement it. It's actually, we worked on it, I don't know, for a year-ish now, and it's just been produced. It's got a lot of information in there, but again, if you're not familiar with the information, I agree the training needs to happen now. Some whole day training there. There's Hamid next door runs a whole day course for building officials. Also, Small Planet Design has gone around the province and done a whole course day with building officials where you actually build a structure in, say, a ballroom like this. They pressurize it, put some smoke in it, and you can see how well it performs. So the seeing is believing is found is the easiest way to increase the learning I found with everyone in at least my small community. The mayors and council really came, real estate agents came, builders came, sub-trades came, building officials. Everyone's been to an air tightness test now, so at least they have that on air tightness is pretty abstract to think about when you're looking at prescriptiveness. How do you quantitatively prescribe airtightness? How do you inspect airtightness? It's this moving target. It's this invisible movement of air, right? But when you actually see it quantitatively on an airtightness test, you'll start to understand that, and that's where the biggest gains can be met to meet the lower level codes, or sorry, lower level steps, is airtightness.
And just one last thought to leave this. First of all, you've got our educator in the room. She's the most amazing person. So if you want training, she's the person to be chatting with. Wave. Hi. Yeah, good to see you. The other thing to think about, though, this is a small symptom of what we need as, not even as an organization, but as our own departments or divisions or whatever we are within our communities, is 2032, the new code in 2022, 2027, we know this stuff happens. If we're running as hard as we can to just try and meet the service levels that our council or directorship expects of us, how can we ever get ahead? We need time within our regular day-to-day duties to be able to improve our application processes, our knowledge, our technical abilities, our enabling competencies of how to say no in a nice way. We need to find and advocate for, as individuals within, or as departments within our organization, for the adequate level of resources, be that financial training or staffing or whatever it is, over the next 10, 15 years, as we transform to a low carbon economy, a carbon negative built environment. No one has a larger role to play in that than the people that are at this conference. We literally decide what our urban environment looks like and who gets to live where. That is an incredibly honorable role to play, and I think that we as an organization and as individuals in our organizations respectively need to step up and say, look, you want to be the greatest out there? It's not the planning department that gets the zone. It's not the district energy that puts pipes in the streets. It's where you put your head at night, and we are the ones that help to decide what that building looks like and how to get it to that net zero target. And unless we have the capacity to do so and train towards it, we will always be behind. So leave you with that. Go forth, be strong, ask for resources.
And a final note on the ask for resources part. If there is something that your community needs to see, if there's something your building department needs to see, if there's some sort of training that's needed in your area, please let me know, and I will do everything humanly possible to bring that to you. That is what this is about. This is about ensuring that you guys get the education and training that you need, and it is valued by all of you.
Pretty simple last statement. I think us appreciate that, us being people that do it. The biggest resistance I'm finding is those that are able to say they are engaged.
Absolutely.
That's those are people that need convinced. We're convinced, but we don't always get the opportunity.
Absolutely. Council is a scary environment. Even senior leadership for us is a bit of a scary. We'd rather be in with the hammers and the nails than wearing suits. So it's a real transformation. I think the Building Act is giving us the ability and the impetus to be that. But yeah, it changes stuff.
And even if you're in a small community, like we were pretty mighty this year in requesting this change to the building code, because the Teddy was unfair to Kimberley. We're a community of 8,000 people, and the changes happened because we pointed out that it was unfair. So like say, implementing it might not be fair to all your communities again in 2022, and it might need a third revision. But you guys will find that out if you don't implement early. Yeah, and good luck.
Talking to council, neighbor council, I have no objections to coming and speaking to any council and encouraging them in any direction that we need, whether it be extra training for you guys, whether it be helping implementing the energy step code. I don't mind coming and twisting arms. Like, trust me on that.
Great.
I'll use my mom voice if I have to.
Thanks, Kat.
So just let me know, please.
And if you haven't signed the sign-in, it's up here at the front. Okay.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you very much.